Picture standing at the entrance of a shadowy temple, the air thick with incense, your heart pounding as you wait for a message that could change the course of your life. This wasn't just a scene from a myth, it was reality for countless people in the ancient world who sought answers from oracles. These mysterious figures weren't mere fortune tellers, they were the voice of the divine, the interpreters of fate, and their prophecies shaped the decisions of kings, the outcomes of wars, and the rise and fall of entire civilizations. From the famed Oracle of Delphi, whose cryptic words guided Greek leaders, to the lesser-known but equally powerful oracles of Dodona, where the rustling of sacred oak trees carried divine warnings, these ancient seers wielded an influence that still leaves us in awe today. What if I told you that some of their predictions were so startlingly accurate, they defy easy explanation? Take the Oracle of Delphi's warning to King Croesus of Lydia. If he attacked Persia, a great empire would fall. Confident in his own strength, he marched to war only to realize too late that the empire destined to crumble was his own. Or consider the prophecies whispered to Roman emperors, foretelling victories and downfalls with eerie precision. How did these oracles tap into knowledge that seemed to bend time itself? Were they channeling divine insight, mastering psychological manipulation, or perhaps even accessing lost sciences we've yet to rediscover? This journey isn't just about unraveling ancient mysteries. It's about understanding how humanity has always sought to peer beyond the veil of the unknown. The methods these oracles used, from interpreting the flight of birds to deciphering the cracks in scorched bones, reveal a profound connection between the sacred and the everyday. And their legacy, it's woven into our modern world in ways you might not expect. By the time we're done, you'll see these ancient clues to the past not as dusty relics, but as living puzzles that still have something to teach us about the future. So let's step into the dim light of history together and listen closely, because the whispers of the oracles might just hold answers we're still searching for today. The story of oracles begins in the dim light of ancient temples, where the boundary between the human and divine worlds grew thin. Long before the Oracle of Delphi spoke from her tripod throne, civilizations across the Mediterranean were already seeking answers from forces beyond ordinary understanding. In Egypt, priests at the Temple of Ammon in the oasis of seiðr interpreted the god's will through the movement of sacred statues carried in procession, a practice dating back to the second millennium before the Common Era. These rituals weren't mere spectacle. They were the foundation of statecraft, with pharaohs like Thutmose III basing military campaigns on divine pronouncements. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, the art of divination reached astonishing sophistication. Babylonian priests would examine the livers of sacrificed sheep, mapping every bump and discoloration onto clay tablets as coded messages from the gods. Their libraries overflowed with manuals explaining how to read these signs, proof that oracle traditions weren't just mystical guesswork, but systematized knowledge passed down through generations. And then there were the Greeks, who transformed prophecy into a cultural institution. Delphi's origins are shrouded in myth. Some say Apollo slew the serpent python to claim the site, while others whisper that the temple sits above a fissure releasing vapors that induce prophetic trances. What we know for certain is that by the 8th century before the Common Era, kings and commoners alike were making arduous pilgrimages up Mount Parnassus, desperate for guidance. But why did these traditions take root so deeply? Imagine living in a world where earthquakes could level cities overnight, where plagues appeared without warning, where the fate of empires hinged on the whims of weather and war. In such uncertainty, oracles didn't just predict the future, they offered a framework for understanding chaos. When the priestess at Dodona listened to the rustling of Zeus' sacred oak, or when the Sibyl of Cumae scribbled her visions on oak leaves, people weren't just hearing guesses. They were receiving a language of meaning, a way to navigate a capricious universe. This wasn't blind faith. It was the ancient world's most sophisticated attempt to find patterns in the noise of existence. The power of these oracles grew precisely because their messages were rarely straightforward. A Delphic response might tell a general to seek victory with a wooden wall, leaving him to interpret whether that meant ships or fortifications. This ambiguity forced rulers to engage deeply with the advice, turning prophecy into a collaborative act of wisdom. Alexander the Great's visit to Seiðr demonstrates this perfectly. By the time he emerged from the Temple of Ammon, he carried not just a prediction, but the conviction that he was destined to conquer the known world. That's the real secret behind these ancient institutions. They didn't just foretell the future, they shaped it. Of all the sacred sites where mortals sought glimpses of destiny, none shone brighter than Delphi. Perched between towering cliffs and olive groves, this wasn't just a temple, it was the beating heart of the ancient world's spiritual imagination. At its center sat the Pythia, a priestess chosen from Delphi's women, who entered a trance unlike anything described elsewhere. Ancient accounts speak of sweet-smelling vapors rising from a crack in the earth, of the Pythia clutching her tripod seat as Apollo's voice poured through her. Modern geologists have actually discovered two fault lines crossing beneath the ruins with traces of ethylene gas, a substance known to induce euphoric states. This revelation blurs the line between divine intervention and earthly phenomena, making Delphi's power even more fascinating. The ritual itself was anything but casual. After days of purification with Castalian spring water and offerings of laurel leaves, the Pythia would descend into the temple's inner chamber. Seekers presented their questions to priests, who then relayed them to the priestess. Her responses, often fragmented, poetic, or riddled with double meanings, were then interpreted by the temple's attendants. Take the Spartan king Leonidas, who was told either that his city would be destroyed or that a Spartan king must perish to save it. He chose to stand at Thermopylae, turning ambiguity into legend. This deliberate obscurity wasn't a flaw, it was Delphi's genius. By forcing rulers to engage deeply with the prophecy's layers, the oracle ensured they became active participants in shaping their fates. Delphi's influence stretched far beyond Greece. When Athenian statesman Themistocles asked how to defend against Persian invasion, the oracle's mention of wooden walls sparked debate. Did it mean the city's palisades or its navy? Themistocles bet on ships, a decision that led to victory at Salamis and changed the course of Western civilization. Even failures underscored Delphi's power. When the wealthy king Croesus tested multiple oracles by asking what he'd be doing on a specific day, only Delphi's answered, describing him boiling a tortoise and lamb in a bronze pot, proved accurate. Yet when he later asked about attacking Persia, the same precision became his undoing. The empire that fell was his own, proving that even true prophecies demand wise interpretation. What made Delphi endure for over 1,000 years wasn't just accuracy, it was adaptability. As Greek city-states rose and fell, the oracle's language evolved, offering counsel that resonated across generations. Pilgrims didn't come merely for predictions, they sought the wisdom to navigate uncertainty. In a world without satellites or science, Delphi was a compass pointing toward clarity. Its final prophecy, given to Emperor Julian in the 4th century, lamented the end of pagan traditions, yet even in fading, the Pythia's voice carried weight. Today, as archaeologists piece together temple fragments and historians decode ancient texts, we're left with a profound realization. Delphi's true magic lay not in foreseeing the future, but in helping humanity confront it with courage. The methods ancient oracles used to peer into the future were as varied as they were mysterious, each one a window into how different cultures understood the unseen forces shaping their lives. At Delphi, the Pythia's trance-like state, induced by those strange underground vapors, was just the beginning. Over in Dodona, the oldest Greek oracle, priests didn't rely on human intermediaries at all. Instead, they listened to the whispers of Zeus himself, carried on the wind through the trembling leaves of a sacred oak grove. Every rustle, every creak of branches held meaning, decoded by priestesses who'd spent lifetimes learning nature's secret language. But perhaps the most visceral form of divination came from the Etruscans and Babylonians, who practiced haruspicy, the art of reading animal entrails. Imagine a solemn ceremony where a sheep's liver was carefully removed, its lobes and markings scrutinized like a celestial map. To modern eyes, this might seem grotesque, but to ancient observers, it was science. They believed the gods had inscribed answers in the very flesh of the world, and these priests were trained to translate them. Clay models of livers, some with annotations still visible, have been found from Mesopotamia to Italy, proving how widespread and systematized this practice truly was. Then there were the celestial oracles like those in Egypt and Mesopotamia, who tracked the movements of planets and stars with astonishing precision. The Babylonians in particular kept meticulous records of lunar eclipses, planetary alignments, and even weather patterns, creating a database of omens spanning centuries. When they warned a king that a certain constellation foretold famine or invasion, it wasn't wild guesswork, it was based on generations of observed patterns. This blend of astronomy and prophecy shows how tightly intertwined the sacred and the scientific were in the ancient mind. Less dramatic but equally fascinating were the lot oracles, where seekers would pose a question and draw a random token, a pebble, a piece of wood, or even a bean from a sacred vessel. The token's markings held the answer. This might sound like chance to us, but in a world where the divine was thought to guide every outcome, randomness didn't exist. Even the simple act of casting lots was a conversation with fate. What unites all these methods is their deep ritual significance. Before consulting the oracle at seiðr, petitioners bathed in a sacred spring and offered honey cakes to the gods. At Delphi, no question could be asked without first sacrificing a goat and ensuring its entrails showed favorable signs. These weren't just formalities, they were ways of preparing both the seeker and the universe for a moment of revelation. Modern scholars still debate how much of the oracle's accuracy came from genuine insight versus psychological mastery. The Pythia's vague pronouncements, for example, often forced leaders to confront truths they already knew but hadn't acknowledged. When the oracle told Oedipus he'd kill his father and marry his mother, the real horror wasn't the prediction, it was the way it revealed the inevitable consequences of his own choices. That's the paradox of ancient divination. The methods might seem strange to us, but their power lay in how they reflected humanity's deepest fears and hopes. Whether through trances, entrails, or whispering leaves, these rituals gave people a way to face the unknown, not with certainty but with courage, and in that sense maybe we're not so different today. After all, don't we still look for signs in the world around us, hoping for a glimpse of what's to come? Ambiguity was the secret weapon of ancient oracles, a linguistic labyrinth where every twist could lead to triumph or tragedy. Consider the prophecy given to King Croesus. If you cross the Hollies River, a great empire will fall. The certainty in those words was an illusion, a mirror reflecting the listener's own assumptions. Croesus heard only the promise of Persia's collapse, never considering his own kingdom might be the empire destined to crumble. This wasn't deception, it was psychological brilliance. Like a river branching in countless directions, vague prophecies allowed multiple outcomes to coexist until history chose its path. The genius of this ambiguity lay in its adaptability. When the Pythia told a Spartan commander that either his city would be sacked or a king must die, she wasn't hedging her bets, she was offering a framework for courage. The Spartans interpreted it as a call to sacrifice, and Leonidas's stand at Thermopylae became legend. Had they instead chosen to surrender, the same prophecy could have been framed as an unavoidable doom. This flexibility transformed oracles into timeless authorities, their words gaining new meaning with each generation that revisited them. Oedipus's story reveals the darker side of this power. Told he would kill his father and marry his mother, he fled Corinth in horror only to unknowingly fulfill the prophecy by encountering his birth parents on the road. The oracle's words weren't a fixed roadmap, but a trap sprung by human nature itself. His frantic efforts to avoid fate became the very engine that drove him toward it. This paradox made oracles terrifyingly effective. Their predictions didn't just foretell the future, they altered how people behaved, often creating the outcomes they described. Modern psychology recognizes this as the self-fulfilling prophecy effect. When the Roman general Crassus consulted the Sibylline books before invading Parthia, the warning about a great leader falling filled his army with such dread that their morale crumbled in battle. The prophecy didn't predict defeat, it engineered it through the weight of expectation. Leaders who dismissed ambiguous warnings as nonsense risked calamity, while those who overinterpreted them sometimes paralyzed themselves with caution. The oracle's true skill lay in making people confront the uncertainties they feared most. This art of calculated vagueness survives today in horoscopes, political forecasts, and even tech predictions anywhere wisdom is wrapped in layers of interpretation. The Delphic maxim, "Know thyself," takes on new meaning here. The best prophecies were never about revealing destiny, but about forcing seekers to examine their own biases and blind spots. When the Pythia whispered from her tripod, she wasn't just speaking to kings and generals. She was holding up a mirror to humanity's eternal struggle, our desperate need to control what was never ours to command. History bends to the whispers of prophecy when empires hang in the balance, and few predictions carried more weight than those given to Athens as Persian forces massed at their gates. When the Delphic oracle first warned of walls of wood that alone would remain unconquered, it sparked panic in the Athenian assembly. Some argued for barricading the city with timber palisades, but Themistocles saw deeper. He recognized the phrase as a coded mandate to bet everything on their fledgling navy. The resulting victory at Salamis in 480 before the Common Era didn't just save Greece, it birthed the naval supremacy that would define Western warfare for millennia. What's astonishing isn't just the oracle's foresight, but how its ambiguity forced leaders to think strategically, turning cryptic poetry into military genius. Across the Mediterranean, another prophetic voice was shaping Rome's destiny. The Sibyl of Cumae, a figure so ancient even the Romans called her traditions old, sold her books of prophecies to King Tarquin after burning the first 6 as warnings. These surviving texts became Rome's emergency manual consulted during plagues, invasions, and political crises. When Augustus found a Sibylline verse predicting a golden age under a leader born of Apollo, he didn't just embrace the prophecy, he engineered his entire reign to fulfill it, commissioning temples and coins that tied his rule to divine mandate. Here, prophecy wasn't passive prediction. It was a tool emperors wielded to legitimize power and unify fracturing empires. Then there's the electrifying moment Alexander the Great stood in the shimmering heat of the seiðr oasis, where the oracle of Ammon declared him the son of Zeus himself. This wasn't mere flattery, it was geopolitical dynamite. By grafting Greek divinity onto Egyptian tradition, Alexander didn't just claim a title, he fused cultures, giving his conquests the aura of cosmic inevitability. His subsequent victories from Persia to India were fueled by soldiers who believed they marched alongside a living god. The prophecy became self-fulfilling, proving how oracles could rewrite the boundaries of human ambition. But not all prophetic interventions ended in glory. The tragedy of King Laius reveals the darker alchemy of fate and free will. Told his son would kill him, Laius ordered the infant Oedipus abandoned, a desperate act that ironically set the child on the path to fulfilling the very prophecy meant to avoid it. This chilling paradox underscores why rulers feared ignoring oracles. Even attempts to thwart destiny could become its instrument. The brilliance of these ancient systems lay in their understanding of human nature, that prophecies don't just predict actions, they provoke reactions that ripple through history. From the thunder of triremes at Salamis to the sandstorms of seiðr, these stories share a common thread. The most powerful prophecies weren't about seeing the future, but about creating it. When leaders treated oracle counsel as living dialogue rather than fixed script, they tapped into something beyond divination, a collective wisdom that blended intuition, strategy, and the courage to reinterpret signs when circumstance demanded. That's why these echoes from antiquity still resonate. In our own era of uncertainty, we may not consult priestesses or sheep livers, but we still grapple with the same essential question: how to discern the signal in life's noise and find the wisdom to act or not act when the stakes are highest. The crack in the earth beneath Delphi's temple wasn't just a geological quirk, it may have been the very source of the oracle's power. When archaeologists first uncovered traces of ethylene gas in the bedrock there, it solved a mystery that had puzzled historians for centuries: how the Pythia entered those frenzied trances. Ethylene isn't just any vapor, it's a sweet-smelling compound known to induce euphoria, out-of-body sensations, and even prophetic visions at certain concentrations. Picture the scene: the priestess inhaling these fumes as she perched on her tripod, her words spilling forth in rhythmic bursts while priests scrambled to interpret them. This wasn't mere theater, it was chemistry and spirituality colliding in ways we're only beginning to understand. But Delphi wasn't alone in harnessing nature's pharmacy. In the Amazon, shamans still brew ayahuasca, a potent psychedelic that opens doorways to what they call the spirit world. The ancient Greeks had their own version, kykeon, a barley-based drink laced with ergot fungus, which contains compounds strikingly similar to LSD. During the Eleusinian Mysteries, initiates drank this potion in sacred rituals, emerging with revelations that changed them forever. The parallels are impossible to ignore. Across cultures, seekers of divine knowledge often turned to substances that altered perception, as if the secrets of the universe hid just beyond ordinary consciousness. Yet dismissing these experiences as mere drug-induced hallucinations misses the point. Modern neuroscience shows that altered states can unlock unusual cognitive pathways, blending creativity, memory, and intuition in ways that feel supernatural. When the Pythia spoke of events far in the future, or when Siberian shamans described distant landscapes with eerie accuracy, they might have been accessing latent abilities of the human mind, abilities we still don't fully comprehend. Consider the case of the Oracle of Dodona, where priestesses interpreted the rustling of oak leaves. Scientists now know certain infrasound frequencies, inaudible to humans, can trigger feelings of awe or dread. Was the sacred grove humming with vibrations that heightened the priestess's sensitivity? The real question isn't whether these oracles were high, but why their methods worked so profoundly. A Babylonian priest examining a sheep's liver wasn't just seeing random patterns, he was trained to spot anomalies through years of study, much like a modern doctor reading an X-ray. The hallucinogens, gases, and rhythmic rituals were tools to focus attention, quiet doubt, and tap into collective wisdom. When the Pythia told Croesus about the falling empire, her words carried weight not because they were chemically enhanced, but because they emerged from a sacred system that commanded belief. Perhaps that's the most fascinating twist of all. The substances didn't create the prophecies. They created the conditions for people to hear them. In a world before laboratories and telescopes, these altered states were humanity's first experiments with expanding the boundaries of knowledge. The fact that we're still piecing together their secrets today proves one thing: whether through gas, plants, or sheer ritual, the oracles found ways to speak across time, and we're still leaning in to listen. While the Oracle of Delphi may be history's most famous seer, she was far from alone in her craft. Across the globe, civilizations developed strikingly similar traditions, each with their own rituals for piercing the veil of time. In China, scholars consulted the I Ching, or Book of Changes, casting yarrow stalks or coins to generate 64 possible hexagrams. These intricate symbols weren't fortune cookies. They were a philosophical language blending cosmology and human psychology. When Confucius said he'd give 50 years to study the I Ching, he recognized its depth, a system where the wise see patterns while fools see only omens. The hexagrams reflected life's fluidity, offering not rigid predictions but guidance on how to navigate shifting tides. Venture north to the Viking world, and you'd find Völva's seeresses who practiced seiðr, a form of magic so potent it was considered taboo for men. Cloaked in feathered robes, these women entered trances to foresee battles, famines, or the fate of kings. The sagas tell of one who predicted the exact day of a chieftain's death, while another warned of a doomed expedition to Greenland. Their visions came at a price. Norse society both revered and feared them, knowing their words could alter destinies. What's fascinating is how their rituals mirrored Delphi's, using staffs like the Pythia's tripod and chanting in voices that seemed not wholly their own. Half a world away, the Maya built entire cities aligned with celestial cycles, believing the stars whispered secrets to those who could listen. Priests known as I Ching tracked Venus movements with jaw-dropping precision, using their observations to time coronations and wars. The Dresden Codex, a surviving Mayan manuscript, contains tables predicting eclipses centuries in advance. But their prophecies weren't just astronomical, they were deeply personal. A child's birth under a certain constellation might dictate their lifelong path, from healer to warrior. This fusion of cosmic order and human fate reveals a truth. Whether in Greek temples or Mayan pyramids, people sought to place their lives within a grander design. Africa's divination traditions, rich as the continent itself, often turned to the earth for answers. The Zulu Sangoma might cast bones, shells, or stones, reading their patterns like a sacred map. Each piece represented ancestors, natural forces, or social bonds, not predicting the future so much as diagnosing the present's hidden currents. Similarly, the Dagara people of Burkina Faso used cowrie shells to speak with departed elders, blending prophecy with ancestral wisdom. These practices shared a core belief: the future wasn't a distant monolith, but a living conversation between the seen and unseen worlds. From the icy fjords to the African savanna, these traditions prove something profound. However different their methods, whether reading cracks in tortoise shells, interpreting bird flights, or decoding dreams, they all recognized a universal human truth: uncertainty is unbearable without meaning. The Chinese sage, the Norse Völva, and the Mayan priest weren't just fortune tellers. They were bridges between chaos and order, helping their cultures face the unknown not with fear, but with a language of symbols and stories. That's why these systems endured. They didn't promise control over tomorrow. They offered something far more valuable, the courage to meet it. The whispers of oracles didn't fade overnight. It was a slow unraveling, woven into the fabric of shifting empires and evolving belief systems. By the time Emperor Theodosius ordered Delphi's closure in the 4th century, the world had already begun turning away from the old gods. Christianity's rise played no small part in this transformation. Monotheistic faith saw pagan prophecy not just as obsolete, but as dangerous heresy. The very idea of mortals channeling divine knowledge clashed with a new worldview where truth flowed from a single, unchanging source. Church fathers like Augustine dismissed oracles as demonic trickery, while others claimed they'd been silenced by the birth of Christ, a narrative that framed their decline as inevitable. Yet religion wasn't the only force at work. As Greek and Roman cities expanded, so did the machinery of governance. Emperors no longer needed ambiguous pronouncements from a priestess when they had networks of spies, engineers, and legal advisors. The rise of rational philosophy, from Aristotle to the Stoics, encouraged people to seek answers in logic rather than divination. Why consult the rustling leaves of Dodona when Archimedes could calculate the trajectory of a siege engine? Science didn't just offer better tools, it offered certainty, or at least the illusion of it. The same cultures that once trembled at Sibylline prophecies now charted star movements with precision, replacing mystery with mathematics. Politics delivered the final blow. Roman emperors, once devout seekers of oracle counsel, grew wary of prophecies that could undermine their authority. When the Sibylline books warned of calamity, rulers like Nero and Caligula didn't change course. They burned troublesome scrolls and banished priests. The oracle's greatest strength, their independence, became their vulnerability. In an age of absolute power, leaders preferred flattering astrologers to truth-telling seers. Delphi's last recorded prophecy, given to Emperor Julian's physician, lamented the death of paganism itself. It was a poignant epitaph, the voice that once guided nations reduced to mourning its own irrelevance. But to say oracles vanished entirely would be missing their quiet rebirth. The medieval world still had its visionaries, Joan of Arc hearing saints' voices, Norse shamans reading runes, while Renaissance princes secretly consulted alchemists and star charts. Even today, we see their legacy in the tarot reader's shuffled deck, the economist's algorithmic forecast, the way we scour weather apps or stock trends for glimpses of tomorrow. The methods have changed, but the longing remains, to touch the unknown before it touches us. What truly ended wasn't humanity's hunger for prophecy, but the world that made priestesses and sacred springs its most trusted guides. The oracles didn't fail us, we simply outgrew them, trading tripods for telescopes without ever losing that primal urge to peer beyond the horizon. The neon glow of a psychic storefront might seem worlds away from Delphi's sacred smoke, but the thread connecting them is stronger than you'd think. Today's seekers still line up for tarot readings and astrology apps, trading golden tripods for smartphone notifications. Even the language we use betrays our ancient roots when a weather forecaster warns of acts of God, or a financial analyst speaks of market divination. They're channeling the same impulse that once drove kings to consult priestesses. The tools have changed, but the trembling hope in our voices when we ask, "What's coming next?" remains eerily familiar. Consider the rise of algorithmic prophecy. Where Babylonian priests once tracked celestial omens, Wall Street now deploys machine learning to predict stock trends. These digital oracles process mountains of data, consumer habits, geopolitical shifts, even satellite images of crop yields, to generate probabilities with mathematical precision. Yet for all their silicon clarity, they share a key trait with the Pythia's riddles. Their predictions shape the very futures they describe. When an AI model forecasts a recession, it triggers panic selling that can make the prediction self-fulfilling, just as Delphi's warnings altered the strategies of ancient generals. The medium has evolved from sacred smoke to server farms, but the dance between prophecy and human behavior plays on. Then there's the booming industry of personal divination. Astrology apps like Co-Star harness NAS data to generate daily horoscopes, reframing star charts as push notifications. Modern psychics, far from the secluded sibyls of old, build followings on TikTok and Instagram, offering bite-sized prophecies between makeup tutorials and dance trends. The packaging is sleek, but the substance isn't so different from the lot oracles of antiquity. Instead of drawing beans from a jar, we scroll for randomized tarot spreads. What's revealing is how these practices thrive even in our age of science. When a tech CEO consults a numerologist before a product launch, or a politician checks their astrological transits, they're participating in a tradition as old as civilization itself, the search for signs in the chaos. The most striking parallel, though, lies in our hunger for certainty and our tolerance for ambiguity. Ancient oracles mastered the art of flexible prophecy, where a great empire will fall, could adapt to any outcome. Modern predictors face a paradox. We demand accuracy but secretly crave the wiggle room that keeps hope alive. Weather apps might give percentage-based rain forecasts, but we still carry umbrellas on 20% chance days, interpreting data through the lens of personal bias. Financial gurus hedge predictions with phrases like, "unless market conditions shift," mirroring the Delphic priestess's caveats. It seems no matter how advanced our tools become, we still need prophecies that bend rather than break under reality's weight. Perhaps that's why, despite our technological leaps, the mystics haven't disappeared. In Seoul, AI-powered future cafes analyze your coffee grounds with deep learning algorithms, blending ancient tasseomancy with neural networks. In California, Silicon Valley's elite attend algorithmic meditation retreats where machine-generated mantras promise to unlock destiny. These hybrids of old and new reveal an uncomfortable truth. The more we automate prediction, the more we long for the human touch, the whisper that feels tailored just for us. Pythia's power came not from infallibility, but from her ability to meet each seeker where they stood, offering not just answers but meaning. So have we outgrown the oracle or simply digitized it? The answer lies in the questions we still ask. When we stare at a pregnancy test plus sign, refresh a stock portfolio, or anxiously await a medical diagnosis, we're standing in the same emotional space as Croesus at the Holly's River, terrified of what's coming, yet desperate to know. The venues shift from temples to trading floors, the voices from priestesses to podcasts, but the heart of the ritual remains unchanged. We might scoff at sheep livers today, yet we'll gladly trust a smartphone app that claims to predict our soulmate or career path. Maybe the real prophecy is this: no matter how advanced we become, we'll always find ways to gaze into the unknown, armed with whatever tools our era provides, be they sacred springs or stochastic models. The human mind is a pattern-seeking machine, constantly stitching together meaning from the chaos around us, and that's precisely why prophecy works. Think of the last time you saw a face in the clouds or heard a hidden message when a song played backward. This tendency, known as apophenia, isn't a flaw. It's how we've survived for millennia, spotting predators in rustling grass or predicting seasons by the stars. But this same wiring makes us vulnerable to the illusion of prophecy. When the Pythia told King Croesus that a great empire will fall, His brain latched onto the interpretation that flattered his ambitions, ignoring the other possible outcomes until history forced him to confront the truth. Confirmation bias turbocharges this effect. We're far more likely to remember the prophecy that predicted a disaster than the dozen others that fizzled into obscurity. Take the Siberian shamans who supposedly foresaw the Tunguska meteor event in 1908. Their vague warnings about fire from the sky only gained legendary status after the explosion. Forgotten are the countless predictions of celestial doom that never materialized. This selective memory transforms coincidence into clairvoyance, giving ancient oracles an unshakable reputation for accuracy. Even today, how many stock market gurus build careers on one lucky forecast while their failed predictions fade into silence? Then there's the self-fulfilling prophecy, where belief itself bends reality. When Roman generals marched into battle clutching favorable omens, their troops fought with unshakable confidence, often turning the tide through sheer morale. Conversely, the Spartan king Cleomenes abandoned his siege of Argos after an oracle warned of impending doom, creating the very defeat he feared. Modern psychology recognizes this as the placebo effect's darker cousin. If you're told you'll fail, you might unconsciously sabotage your success. The Delphic oracle's real power wasn't foreseeing the future. It was shaping decisions in ways that made certain futures inevitable. Consider how these forces play out in our own lives. Ever checked a horoscope that said, "A financial opportunity arises," then jumped at the first chance to invest? That's apophenia, linking random events into a narrative. Or clung to a fortune cookie's vague promise during a rough patch, ignoring the ones that didn't resonate. That's confirmation bias at work. Even science isn't immune. Researchers chasing a breakthrough might interpret ambiguous data as confirmation of their theory, just as Babylonian priests saw divine messages in every sheep's liver. What's fascinating isn't that ancient people fell for these tricks, but that we still do. From sports fans trusting per-game rituals to executives relying on data astrology, the psychology of prophecy remains unchanged. The oracles simply mastered these quirks of the human mind long before psychologists named them. Their genius lay in crafting predictions flexible enough to fit multiple outcomes, yet authoritative enough to command belief. In the end, the most enduring prophecy might be this: as long as humans crave certainty in an uncertain world, we'll keep finding or inventing signs to guide us. The story of Emperor Julian's fatal brush with the Delphic oracle reads like a tragic play penned by the gods themselves. In the year 363, as Christianity tightened its grip on Rome, this defiant ruler sought to revive the old pagan ways, and where better to legitimize his mission than at Delphi, even as its flame flickered toward extinction. The Pythia's final recorded prophecy dripped with ominous poetry. "Tell the emperor that my hall has fallen to the ground, that Apollo no longer has a roof over his head, nor a prophetic laurel, nor a spring that speaks. The water has dried up," but hidden within this lament lay a razor-sharp warning against Julian's planned invasion of Persia. The message couldn't have been clearer. The age of oracles was ending, and so too would any who defied their counsel. What happened next became the stuff of legend. Julian pressed onward into Persian territory, only to meet a bizarre death weeks later, struck down by a spear that some claimed came from his own panicked troops in the chaos of battle. Ancient historians whispered of darker forces at work. Libanius, Julian's friend and biographer, suggested the spear was wielded by a Christian soldier exploiting the prediction's psychological power. Whether by accident or design, the emperor's demise perfectly fulfilled the oracle's implicit warning, cementing Delphi's reputation even in its twilight. This wasn't merely a failed military campaign. It was the collision of human ambition with the gravitational pull of prophecy. Modern scholars still debate the threads connecting prediction to outcome. Some point to Julian's heightened recklessness after the ominous message, his strategic decisions warped by the weight of divine disapproval. Others highlight how the prophecy emboldened his enemies, giving them both motive and supernatural cover for assassination. The truth likely blends both a textbook example of how prophecies don't just foresee events, but actively shape them through the fears and actions they inspire. When Julian's army heard their emperor had been cursed by Apollo himself, morale crumbled like the very stones of Delphi's abandoned temple. What makes this case so haunting is its timeless resonance. Centuries later, Napoleon would dismiss a fortune-teller's warning about Russia with similar defiance, only to meet his own winter ruin. Modern CEOs ignore market omens at their peril, and politicians dismiss polling data to their downfall. The mechanism remains unchanged. When we're warned of disaster, our reaction, whether heedless bravery or paralyzing fear, often becomes the instrument of our fate. Julian's story endures not because the oracle was magical, but because it reveals the uncomfortable truth that the most powerful predictions are the ones we believe enough to make real. In that sense, maybe Delphi's voice never fell silent at all. It just learned to speak through our own choices. Even in their heyday, oracles faced sharp criticism from some of antiquity's brightest minds. Cicero, the Roman statesman and philosopher, dismissed prophecies as the random utterances of frenzied women, arguing that vague predictions could fit any outcome with enough creative interpretation. He recounted how two men receiving the same prophecy, "You will conquer your enemies," could both claim its truth if one won a battle while the other simply outlived his rivals. This skepticism wasn't confined to intellectuals. Athenian politicians openly accused Delphi's priests of accepting Persian bribes during the Greco-Persian Wars, alleging the oracle's pro-Persian responses were less about divine wisdom and more about backroom deals. Yet accusations of fraud often coexisted with genuine reverence. Take the curious case of King Cleomenes of Sparta, who famously bribed the oracle at Delphi to declare his rival unfit for kingship. When the scheme succeeded, he didn't dismiss the oracle as corrupt. He simply saw it as proof that even the divine could be nudged by mortal hands. This duality reveals a fascinating truth. Ancient people weren't naive. They understood that sacred institutions could be manipulated, yet still believed in their essential power. It's a tension we recognize today. How many skeptics roll their eyes at horoscopes, only to feel a chill when one eerily aligns with their life. The mechanics of deception were sometimes startlingly modern. Priestesses, often young women from humble backgrounds, could face immense pressure to deliver favorable prophecies to powerful patrons. Historical accounts hint at whispered coaching from temple priests or the strategic use of hallucinogens to induce compliant visions. One surviving inscription even describes a petitioner bribing temple attendants to guide the Pythia's interpretation. But labeling all oracles as frauds misses a crucial nuance. Even when prophecies were politically influenced, their cultural weight came from collective belief. A manipulated prediction about, say, Athens' naval supremacy only worked because thousands of citizens and soldiers internalized it as destiny. This mirrors contemporary debates about modern psychics and mediums. For every exposé revealing cold reading techniques, there are devotees who swear by life-changing accuracy. The human factors at play, confirmation bias, the placebo effect of belief, the comfort of narrative in chaos, haven't changed. What makes the ancient oracle different is how their predictions became societal glue. When a city faced plague or invasion, the oracle didn't just offer a prediction. She provided a shared story for people to rally around, true or not. Perhaps the most balanced view comes from the oracle sites themselves. Excavations at Dodona uncovered lead tablets where ordinary people scribbled skeptical questions like, "Is the slave lying about the stolen goods?" Alongside fervent pleas for divine intervention, this jumble of doubt and faith feels strikingly familiar, like scrolling through reviews of a modern psychic, torn between fascination and suspicion. The ancients navigated the same gray area we do, aware of the potential for manipulation, yet unwilling to fully relinquish the possibility of something transcendent. In the end, the power of oracles lay not in their infallibility, but in their ability to hold up a mirror to humanity's eternal dance between skepticism and wonder. The cryptic language of ancient oracles wasn't just flowery poetry, it was a sophisticated survival strategy. When the Pythia told Athens that a wooden wall would be their salvation, she wasn't being evasive. She was forcing the city's leaders to engage in a profound strategic debate. This linguistic dance transformed prophecy from passive fortune-telling into an active collaboration between divine insight and human wisdom. The ambiguity served as armor against time phrases crafted centuries ago could still resonate because their meanings weren't locked to specific circumstances. Like a master key, symbolic language could open different doors depending on who held it and when. Consider the layers hidden in the Delphic response to King Pyrrhus before his invasion of Italy. "I say that you, the Romans, can conquer." At first glance, it promised victory, but the Greek syntax allowed another reading that the Romans could conquer him. When Pyrrhus suffered devastating losses despite early wins, the oracle's grammatical sleight of hand revealed itself. This wasn't deception, it was linguistic craftsmanship of the highest order. The priestesses spoke in a dialect of destiny where verbs carried double meanings and nouns shimmered with alternative interpretations. The symbolism often drew from deep cultural wells. Wooden walls evoked Homer's ships in the Iliad for Athenian naval advocates, while traditionalists pictured literal barricades. Animal metaphors, lions, serpents, eagles tapped into shared mythological associations that any Greek would recognize. When the oracle warned Corinth about being ruled by a cyclops, citizens initially feared one-eyed monsters until realizing it foresaw their future tyrant's distinctive eye injury. These weren't random riddles but carefully constructed bridges between the known world and the uncertain future. Some scholars argue the vagueness served as psychological safety net. A prophecy about a great danger from the west could apply to Carthage's fleet for Sicilian Greeks, or to Rome for later generations. The real brilliance lay in how these flexible phrases guided behavior. Ambiguity forced recipients to examine their situation from multiple angles, often arriving at wiser decisions than any straightforward advice could inspire. When the Pythia told King Lycurgus that his laws would last until a fish becomes a torch, it wasn't nonsense, it created a vivid mental image Spartans remembered for centuries, ensuring legal continuity until the improbable occurred, a fish allegedly caught in flames during a siege. Decoding these messages today requires understanding their cultural operating system. The black sail that doomed Theseus, the golden bow that guided Aeneas, these weren't arbitrary symbols but threads in a vast tapestry of shared myths and natural observations. Modern attempts to reconstruct oracle meanings often stumble by applying literal thinking where ancient audiences would have instinctively grasped poetic resonance. The key lies not in treating prophecies as crossword puzzles to solve, but as multifaceted mirrors reflecting humanity's eternal struggle to navigate uncertainty with creativity and courage. What appears to us as obscurity may have been the perfect calibration, clear enough to guide, flexible enough to endure. The test of time proves their success. We're still unraveling their meanings millennia later, each generation finding new relevance in the old words. That's the ultimate power of symbolic language. It doesn't just predict the future, it invites us to co-create it. Cassandra's curse cuts deeper than most myths. Blessed with foresight by Apollo but doomed to never be believed, she became the ultimate symbol of prophecy's double-edged sword. Her warnings about Troy's fall were dismissed as madness, turning her gift into a torment. This archetype resonates because it captures our deepest anxiety. What if we could see disaster coming but couldn't stop it? Greek tragedy thrived on this tension. Oedipus's parents abandoned him to avoid a prophecy, only to set him on the path that fulfilled it. The more they struggled against fate, the tighter its grip became. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were ancient thought experiments about the limits of human agency. Nostradamus took oracle traditions into the Renaissance, cloaking predictions in verses so vague they could fit everything from the Great Fire of London to the rise of Hitler, or nothing at all. His quatrains became a Rorschach test for the paranoid and the hopeful, proving how easily we project meaning onto ambiguity. Unlike Cassandra, whose clarity brought isolation, Nostradamus's obscurity made him immortal. His legacy reveals an uncomfortable truth. Prophecy gains power not from precision, but from our hunger to connect the dots. Modern storytellers have reshaped these ancient templates for a technological age. The Matrix's oracle embodies the trope with a twist, a wise figure who guides Neo not by dictating his path, but by helping him understand his own choices. Her famous line, "You didn't come here to make the choice, you've already made it," echoes the Delphic maxim, "Know thyself." Similarly, Dune's prescient spice visions create a paradox. The harder Paul Atreides fights to avoid his foretold jihad, the more inevitable it becomes. These narratives mirror real-life psychology. Studies show that when people believe a prediction, they often unconsciously act in ways that bring it to pass. Even children's literature wrestles with these themes. The Harry Potter series turns prophecy into a plot grenade. The moment Voldemort hears the prediction about a boy who could defeat him, he sets in motion the very events that will lead to his downfall. Like Oedipus, his attempt to outrun fate becomes the engine of his destruction. What makes these stories endure isn't their supernatural elements, it's how they reflect our own struggles with uncertainty. When a doctor delivers a grim diagnosis or a weather forecaster predicts a hurricane, we're forced into the same emotional territory as mythical heroes. Do we resist, submit, or reinterpret what's coming? The oracle's journey from temple to screen proves something profound. Whether carved on ancient stone or rendered in CGI, these seers endure because they give form to our deepest questions about control and chaos. They remind us that the future isn't a fixed destination. It's a conversation between what we see, what we fear, and what we dare to do about it. And that's a story as old as humanity itself. The cracked stones of Delphi's temple don't just whisper of prophecy. They shout with physical evidence of how deeply these rituals were woven into ancient life. Archaeologists brushing dust from the temple's foundations made a startling discovery. Beneath the sacred precinct ran two intersecting fault lines, their fractures still bearing traces of ethylene gas. This wasn't just geological trivia, it was the smoking gun explaining the Pythia's trances. The same sweet-smelling vapor described in ancient texts has been detected in modern tests, capable of inducing the euphoric states witnesses reported. But the real revelation came when researchers mapped the temple's layout. The Aditon, the inner chamber where the Pythia prophesied, sat directly above this fissure, with a bronze tripod positioned to inhale the rising vapors. Every architectural choice, from the chamber's sunken floor to its ventilation shafts, suggests a carefully engineered system for controlled intoxication. Walk through the ruins of Dodona in northwestern Greece, and you'll stumble upon hundreds of thin lead tablets, each one a personal plea to Zeus scratched by ordinary people centuries ago. "Should I marry Philistia?" asks one. "Is the child mine?" wonders another. These aren't the grand prophecies of legend, but intimate glimpses into how oracles functioned as ancient advice columns. The tablets reveal a meticulous process. Questions were folded to conceal their contents, then pierced with nails perhaps to fix them in the divine realm before being hung near the sacred oak. The rustling leaves didn't just give yes or no answers. Priests interpreted nuances in sound and shadow, turning nature's randomness into personalized guidance. At the Roman Oracle of Claros, excavations uncovered a labyrinthine tunnel system beneath the temple. Here, priests would descend into pitch-black corridors before emerging with divine pronouncements. Scientists found the tunnel's walls coated with a calcium-rich mineral deposit when wet. These surfaces would have reflected lamplight in disorienting ways. Combine that with possible hallucinogenic substances in the sacred spring water petitioners drank, and you have a recipe for awe-inspiring visions, the most chilling find. A stone bench at the tunnel's end, grooved to channel liquids. This may be where exhausted priests collapsed after their performances, physically drained from channeling the gods. The objects left behind tell their own stories. Delphi's museum displays bronze tripods gifted by grateful city-states, some inscribed with the exact prophecies that saved them. A Spartan offering commemorates the wooden wall's advice that defeated Persia, while an Athenian shield bears the ominous words given to Themistocles. These weren't mere trophies, they were propaganda in metal, proof that divine favor backed their military might. Even the graffiti scratched into temple walls by pilgrims speaks volumes. One surviving doodle at seiðr shows a man kneeling before the oracle, with speech bubbles humorously imagining both his nervous question and the god's sarcastic reply, proof that ancient visitors balanced reverence with skepticism. Perhaps the most poignant artifacts are the curse tablets found at oracle sites across the Mediterranean. These lead sheets, etched with pleas for divine vengeance against thieves or rivals, were often nailed near sacred springs believed to carry messages to the underworld. At the Oracle of the Dead in Greece, archaeologists found stacks of these near a chasm once thought to be Hades' entrance. Chemical analysis revealed traces of opium and henbane in the soil, suggesting priests may have enhanced visitors' visions of the afterlife with psychoactive fumes. What emerges from these ruins isn't proof that prophecies were supernatural, but something equally fascinating, a blueprint for how societies manufactured the sacred. The echoing chambers of Claros, the gas vents of Delphi, the whispering oaks of Dodona, these weren't accidental settings. They were carefully staged theaters of awe, where geology, architecture, and ritual conspired to make the impossible feel tangible. When a trembling king heard the Pythia's voice echo through the temple's stone corridors, amplified by the chamber's unique acoustics, it wasn't just a prediction he encountered. It was an experience engineered to humble even the mightiest ruler before forces greater than themselves. The real prophecy these ruins fulfill is showing us how desperately humanity has always sought, and sometimes staged reassurance that the universe speaks our language. The towering temples of ancient oracles didn't just draw pilgrims seeking divine wisdom, they attracted merchants, artisans, and politicians, all eager to profit from the steady stream of visitors. Imagine the scene outside Delphi's sacred precinct. Stalls overflowing with votive offerings, from simple clay figurines to gold-leafed statues, each sold at markup to desperate petitioners hoping to curry favor with the gods. Local inns charged premium rates during festival seasons, while guides hawked interpretation services to help decode the Pythia's riddles. This wasn't merely spiritual tourism. It was a meticulously organized industry where faith and finance flowed as steadily as the Castalian spring. Delphi's treasury stands as the ultimate testament to Prophecies' economic might. Built to house offerings from grateful city-states, its marble walls once held treasures that would rival modern hedge funds. After Athens' naval victory at Salamis, the city donated 1/10 of its captured Persian gold, a windfall that bankrolled Delphi's expansion for decades. But the real power lay in how these sites functioned as ancient banks. Surviving records show Delphi loaning funds to cities at interest, with the temple's divine authority ensuring repayment. When Sparta needed to finance a war, it didn't go to moneylenders, it negotiated with the oracle's priests, turning prophecy into collateral. The commercial machinery extended far beyond Greece. At the Oracle of Ammon in Siwa, caravans arriving across the Sahara paid tolls in salt and gold before their consultations. Egyptian pharaohs sent annual shipments of grain to maintain the oracle's favor, effectively turning divine access into a trade agreement. Even smaller shrines operated like spiritual franchises. The Sibyl of Cumae sold her prophecies in scrolls that functioned as premium religious merchandise, while Dodona's priests charged fees for interpreting Zeus' rustling oak leaves. This monetization wasn't seen as crass. It was considered practical piety, a way to sustain sacred spaces through voluntary exchange. Political leaders quickly recognized the economic leverage oracles provided. When Croesus showered Delphi with gifts, reportedly enough gold to carpet the temple steps, he wasn't just seeking divine favor. He was strategically positioning Lydia as Delphi's patron, ensuring his questions received priority over rival kingdoms. Thebes later replicated this playbook, funding lavish temple renovations to gain influence. Modern parallels are striking. Think of corporations sponsoring mega churches or governments donating to prestigious universities. The currency has changed, but the game remains the same. Access to power flows through controlled channels of prestige. What's often overlooked is how oracle economies shaped regional development. Pilgrim roads became trade routes, with way stations evolving into towns. The sacred way leading to Delphi transformed into a commercial artery where pottery from Corinth, spices from Phoenicia, and amber from the Baltics changed hands. Local industries sprang up around prophetic demand. Athenian workshops mass-produced miniature tripods as affordable offerings, while Illes bred white horses specifically for Zeus' altar at Olympia. Even the oracle's waste had value. The ashes of sacrificial animals were packaged as blessed fertilizer and sold to farmers. This thriving marketplace of the divine reveals a crucial truth. Oracles didn't just predict the future, they funded it. The silver mines financing Athens' golden age, originally dedicated to Apollo after a Delphic prophecy endorsed their operation, the naval docks at Piraeus. Built with loans guaranteed by the oracle's treasury, behind every mystical pronouncement lay very real calculations about resources, alliances, and growth. When the Pythia spoke, cities didn't just hear divine guidance. They heard the clink of coins, the rustle of trade agreements, and the grinding stones of economic ambition. In the end, the gods may have whispered the future, but it was gold that made those whispers audible. In the rigidly patriarchal worlds of ancient Greece and Rome, the sight of a woman standing at the spiritual apex of society would have seemed unimaginable unless she was perched on the tripod of Delphi, channeling the voice of Apollo himself. The Pythia wasn't an exception. She was part of a profound pattern. From the Sibyls of Cumae to the oracle priestesses of Dodona, women dominated this sacred space, wielding authority that would have been unthinkable in politics or war. Their very presence forces us to reconsider antiquity's gender dynamics. revealing a paradoxical truth. Societies that silenced women in the agora gave them megaphones in the temple. The reasons behind this anomaly run deeper than mere tradition. Ancient cultures often linked femininity with receptivity, the ability to open to divine forces like a vessel. Greek poets described prophecy as a form of divine possession, where the god entered the seer. In a worldview that saw women as biologically porous through childbirth, menstruation, this made them ideal conduits for supernatural messages. The Pythia's trance state was described as a sacred marriage with Apollo, her body literally inhabited by masculine divinity. This symbolic union allowed her to voice truths that would have been treasonous coming from an unaffiliated woman. When the Pythia warned kings or criticized policies, it wasn't a female subject speaking. It was a god using female lips, but reducing these women to passive mediums misses their agency. The Sibyl of Cumae negotiated the sale of her prophetic books to Rome's last king, setting terms that placed her wisdom at the heart of the Republic's decision-making for centuries. At Dodona, priestesses didn't just interpret Zeus' rustling oak leaves, they maintained an archive of inquiries and outcomes, essentially building one of history's first predictive databases. Their authority grew from specialized knowledge, not just spiritual theatrics. The Pythia's role required years of training in myth, politics, and the Delphic tradition's coded language. These weren't frenzied maidens, but highly skilled professionals in a system that rewarded their expertise. The trance state itself may have been a form of protected speech. Under the cover of divine possession, priestesses could voice uncomfortable truths criticizing a king's hubris or warning against unjust wars without facing consequences. When the Pythia called Sparta's leadership land-devouring wolves, she did so cloaked in Apollo's authority. Some scholars suggest this was safety theater. The thrashing limbs and garbled words of the trance created plausible deniability, allowing risky messages to be delivered, then blamed on the god's cryptic style. In a society where free-speaking women faced ostracism or worse, prophecy provided sanctioned subversion. Even the oracle's physical space reinforced this gendered power. Delphi's inner sanctum was called the Aditon, literally, the inaccessible, a womb-like chamber where the Pythia sat alone, veiled from petitioners. Male priests handled logistics outside, but all divine speech flowed through her. The arrangement mirrored cultural ideas about female mystery. Just as men couldn't witness childbirth, they couldn't enter the prophetic birth canal where futures emerged. This sacred segregation gave priestesses a realm entirely their own, untouched by the hierarchies governing society beyond the temple steps. Modern excavations hint at how carefully this authority was cultivated. At the Oracle of Didyma, archaeologists found a network of underground tunnels allowing priestesses to appear and vanish dramatically. The Pythia's famed tripod wasn't just a seat, its 3 legs symbolized past, present, and future, while its bronze material conducted the tremors of her trance into audible vibrations. These weren't random props, they were tools of a sacred performance where every detail reinforced the priestess's unique legitimacy. When a woman's words carried such weight that kings would reverse decades of policy based on her utterances, it's no wonder these rituals were engineered for maximum psychological impact. The legacy of these prophetic women echoes in unexpected ways. Early Christian mystics like Hildegard of Bingen would later adopt similar roles, attributing their theological innovations to divine visions. Even today, the trope of the wise woman from fairy tale, witches to modern psychics, draws subconscious power from this ancient link between femininity and foresight. What the oracles teach us is that power isn't always seized through force. Sometimes it's channeled through the very stereotypes meant to constrain it. In a world that saw women as vessels, the priestesses of Delphi and beyond became something far more dangerous: vessels with voices loud enough to shape history. Oracles didn't just speak through smoke and trances, they whispered in the language of dreams, the most intimate and universal form of divine communication. In the hushed darkness of Egyptian temples, priests pored over the dream book, a meticulously catalogued guide where every symbol, from swimming in rivers to being bitten by snakes, held coded meaning. A dream of falcons signaled coming conflict, while visions of ripe figs promised prosperity. This wasn't mere superstition. It was a system as methodical as modern psychology, treating the sleeping mind as a bridge between mortals and gods. When a pharaoh like Thutmose IV dreamed of the Sphinx offering him kingship in exchange for clearing its sands, the story was carved onto stone steel's proof that dreams could shape dynasties. The Greeks took this further with the practice of incubation, where seekers journeyed to sacred sites like the Asclepion at Epidaurus to sleep in hallowed chambers. After rituals of purification and offerings, they'd lie on animal skins, hoping the god Asclepius would visit them in dreams with diagnoses or cures. The temple walls still bear inscriptions of miraculous healings. A blind boy who dreamed the god touched his eyes and awoke seeing. A woman who conceived after dreaming of a serpent, symbol of Asclepius coiling in her lap. These weren't passive experiences. Pilgrims engaged in active dialogue with the divine, their dreams becoming collaborative acts of healing where symbolism and physiology intertwined. What's striking is how these ancient practices mirror modern understandings of the subconscious. Freud's royal road to the unconscious would have felt familiar to Babylonian priests who interpreted dreams as messages from the god Marduk. The line between oracle and dream interpreter was often fluid. The legendary Greek seer Artemidorus wrote a 5-volume Onera Critica, a dream manual so detailed it rivaled Delphi's pronouncements. He distinguished between prophetic dreams sent by gods and those arising from daily anxieties, much like contemporary therapists separate meaningful patterns from mental noise. Even the Bible brims with dream prophecy, from Joseph's sheaves of grain predicting famine to Daniel deciphering Nebuchadnezzar's visions of crumbling statues. These stories share a core belief that the dreaming mind exists in a liminal space where time folds, allowing glimpses beyond the present. Modern neuroscience might call this hyperconnectivity during REM sleep, but the ancients saw it as the soul wandering beyond the body's confines. Today, the echo of these beliefs lingers in our fascination with lucid dreaming or déjà vu. When a musician hears a melody in their sleep or a scientist solves a problem through a dream, they're walking the same path as ancient pilgrims who sought answers in sacred sleep. The oracles understood something we're still grappling with, that the boundary between prophecy and intuition is thinner than we think, and sometimes the most profound truths arrive not with thunderous declarations, but in the quiet hours before dawn. The glow of sacred fires cast long shadows, and some of the darkest manipulations in history unfolded under the guise of divine prophecy. When King Cleomenes of Sparta needed to depose his rival Demaratus, he didn't raise an army or bribe senators. He bribed the oracle at Delphi instead, securing a conveniently timed prophecy declaring Demaratus illegitimate. The result, a king toppled without a single sword drawn, all under the unimpeachable authority of Apollo's voice. This wasn't an isolated incident. Ancient rulers quickly realized that a well-placed prophecy could achieve what armies and laws could not: unquestioning obedience. The mechanics of these deceptions were often startlingly simple. Priestesses, usually chosen from modest backgrounds, could be pressured or paid to deliver favorable pronouncements. Historical accounts describe temple attendants whispering prompts to the Pythia mid-trance, or strategically timing consultations when hallucinogenic vapors were strongest to induce more pliable visions. One surviving inscription even details how a petitioner paid priests to rephrase his question so the answer would align with his ambitions. But the real power lay in the aftermath. Once a prophecy was uttered, it took on a life of its own. When the Roman Senate needed public support for a controversial war against Carthage, they rediscovered a Sibylline verse predicting disaster unless Carthage was destroyed. The verse's authenticity didn't matter. The collective belief in its power mobilized an entire civilization toward annihilation. Fear was the other blade in this divine toolkit. The story of Socrates' trial reveals how prophecy could weaponize dread. His accusers didn't just charge him with corrupting youth, they claimed his philosophical questioning had angered the Delphic oracle, inviting divine wrath upon Athens. This wasn't just slander, it was social control masquerading as piety. Across the Greek world, cities maintained lists of cursed individuals, those accused of offending oracles who could be exiled or executed preemptively to avert disaster. The underlying message was clear: doubt the prophecy and you risk bringing ruin upon everyone. Even seemingly benevolent prophecies carried hidden barbs. When the Pythia told the Athenians to trust their wooden walls against Persia, the ambiguity wasn't just mystical, it was politically expedient. The priestess couldn't know whether ships or barricades would prevail, but by couching advice in symbolism, she ensured that whatever succeeded could be claimed as divine wisdom, while failures could be blamed on human misinterpretation. This calculated vagueness made oracles perfect scapegoats for rulers' mistakes. After the disastrous Sicilian expedition shattered Athenian power, generals pointed to an earlier oracle about conquering the land roundabout as justification, never admitting they'd willfully ignored the warning that this would bring tears. The psychological grip of these manipulations lingers in modern parallels. Think of how 20th century regimes used scientific predictions to justify purges, or how modern algorithms can nudge public opinion under the guise of neutral data. The oracle's robes have changed, but the playbook remains eerily familiar. Dress authority in the trappings of inevitability, and few will dare question it. What makes ancient prophecies uniquely potent is how they blurred the line between deception and delusion. Even when rulers fabricated oracles, they often came to believe their own myths, like Nero consulting astrologers about his reign's longevity, then executing them when their forecasts grew inconvenient. Yet there's a cruel irony in how these manipulations backfired. When the Theban general Epaminondas received a prophecy guaranteeing victory if he attacked Sparta at Leuctra, his troops fought with supernatural confidence and won. Only later did historians suspect the oracle was Spartan propaganda meant to lure Thebes into a trap. The prophecy worked, just not for its intended puppeteers. This paradox lies at the heart of the oracle's dark legacy. Once unleashed, even the most manufactured prophecy takes on a life of its own, bending reality to its narrative in ways no conspirator can fully control. The stones of Delphi may have been rigged, but the fear and power they channeled was terrifyingly real. The ground trembles beneath your feet, not just an earthquake, but a message from the gods. To the ancients, nature wasn't merely a backdrop to human drama. It was an active participant, whispering warnings through every celestial anomaly and aberrant animal cry. When birds abandoned their flight paths or rivers ran red with silt, these weren't random events, they were divine semaphore, a language of impending doom or favor that only oracles could fluently translate. Take the volcanic eruption that obliterated Thera in the 16th century before the Common Era. Minoan priests interpreted the ash-darkened skies and tsunamis as Poseidon's fury, prompting evacuations that saved thousands while inadvertently preserving their civilization's artifacts under meters of pumice. Eclipses in particular sent societies into paroxysms of interpretation. The Babylonians saw them as celestial battles between gods, their priests meticulously recording each event on cuneiform tablets to decode patterns. A famous account describes how an eclipse in 585 before the Common Era halted a war between the Medes and Lydians, both armies interpreting the sudden midday darkness as a command to lay down arms. The Romans took this further, employing specialized augurs to watch for prodigies, showers of blood, actually wind-blown desert sand, statues sweating condensation on cold marble, or wolves entering cities likely driven by drought. These phenomena became the raw material for state-sponsored prophecies, with the Senate voting on which signs merited official response. Animal behavior offered another cipher for divine intent. The sacred chickens carried aboard Roman warships weren't just ritual, their eating habits decided military campaigns. If the birds pecked eagerly at feed, the gods approved. Refusal to eat spelled disaster. When Admiral Claudius Pulcher ignored their warning before the Battle of Drepana, tossing the chickens overboard with a snarl of "let them drink if they won't eat," his fleet was annihilated. The incident became legendary proof that nature's omens weren't to be trifled with. Similarly, the Greeks watched for eagles, Zeus' messengers whose flight patterns could bless or condemn entire colonization efforts. A bird circling right meant proceed, left meant abandon the venture. What's fascinating is how oracles wove these disparate signs into coherent narratives. Before Julius Caesar's assassination, Plutarch records a cascade of omens: sacrificial animals without hearts, comets mistaken for flaming swords, even Caesar's own wife dreaming of his bleeding corpse. The Vestal virgins reportedly found a tablet predicting his death on the Ides of March. Modern science explains these as coincidences: a heartless sheep from congenital defects, the comet Halley's predictable return, nightmares as subconscious anxiety, but to Cicero and his contemporaries, they formed an unmistakable divine indictment. The Senate didn't just murder a man that day, they fulfilled what they saw as cosmological inevitability. This worldview reveals a fundamental difference in perceiving causality. Where we see tectonic plates shifting, they saw gods rearranging the chessboard of fate. A meteor shower wasn't space debris burning up, it was the sky tearing open to reveal tomorrow's horrors. The brilliance of ancient oracles lay in their ability to synthesize this chaos into guidance, offering rulers a way to navigate what felt like a capricious universe. Today, we've traded haruspicy for hurricane trackers, but the impulse remains. When disaster looms, we still search desperately for patterns, for meaning, for someone or something to tell us what comes next. The shadow of ancient oracles stretches far beyond crumbling temples. It flickers across movie screens, pulses through controller vibrations, and lurks in the hashtags of modern conspiracy threads. Zack Snyder's 300 didn't just resurrect Spartan warriors in slow motion. It reintroduced the Oracle of Delphi to millions as a veiled figure whose rasping prophecies set empires in motion. Her scenes, bathed in golden haze and swirling incense, distilled 2,500 years of mystique into a single cinematic question: what if fate could be overheard? Video games amplify this allure. The Assassin's Creed franchise lets players scale Delphi's very columns, while titles like Hades reimagine the Pythia as a snarky, chain-smoking teenager, proof that prophecy adapts effortlessly to new mediums. These aren't mere Easter eggs for history buffs. They're evidence that oracle archetypes still resonate at a visceral level. Language itself carries their legacy. When a politician's vague threat is called a Delphic pronouncement, or a CEO's cryptic tweet sparks stock market panic, we're invoking the same ambiguity that made ancient prophecies so potent. Modern journalism even mirrors the Pythias technique. Headlines like "Experts warn of looming crisis" could apply to anything from inflation to hurricanes, just as "a great empire will fall" kept Croesus guessing. The through line is unmistakable. Whether carved on temple walls or trending on social media, people crave guidance wrapped in enough mystery to feel divinely ordained. Nowhere is this clearer than in conspiracy theories, the 21st century's answer to sacrificial divination. QAnon's "storm is coming" posts function like digital lot oracles, vague enough to fit any political upheaval, yet specific enough to galvanize believers. Like Babylonian priests scrutinizing sheep livers for hidden patterns, online communities dissect random events for proof of their prophecies. The January 6th insurrection wasn't just fueled by misinformation. It was steeped in the same certainty that drove ancient armies that the gods or algorithms had foretold victory. This isn't to equate ancient spiritual practices with modern extremism, but to highlight how prophecy's psychological framework remains eerily effective. Even science fiction can't escape oracle logic. Dune's Bene Gesserit sisterhood, with their calculated breeding prophecies, are essentially Delphic priestesses with space travel. The oracle in the Matrix offers Neo cookies and riddles instead of laurel leaves and ethylene vapors, but her function is identical: to guide seekers toward self-fulfilling realizations. These narratives thrive because they tap into our oldest anxiety, that free will might be an illusion, and some cosmic script already has our endings penned. The most telling tribute to oracles, though, lies in our mundane rituals: checking horoscopes over breakfast, refreshing weather apps before picnics, or trusting algorithm-generated "people who bought this also bought" suggestions. These are all secularized divination. We've swapped tripods for touchscreens, but the impulse remains: to feel like the universe whispers clues to those who know how to listen. Perhaps that's why Delphi's ruins still draw crowds, not just as tourist stops, but as pilgrimage sites. Standing in that once hallowed space, visitors aren't just seeing ancient history, they're confronting humanity's unfinished conversation with uncertainty, a dialogue that started with oak leaves and animal bones, and now unfolds through push notifications and predictive analytics. The mediums evolve, but the longing persists, proof that no Wi-Fi signal can outshine the primal allure of glimpsing tomorrow today. Could the priestess at Delphi, perched above those hallucinogenic fumes, have been doing something more profound than channeling Apollo? Some historians argue that ancient oracles weren't just mystics, they were pioneers of pattern recognition, the earliest data scientists working with the tools of their time. Picture a Babylonian priest tracking decades of lunar cycles etched into clay tablets, or a Dodona priestess correlating specific bird migrations with coming droughts. These weren't random guesses, they were systematic observations disguised as divine revelation. Take weather prediction as an example. The Oracle of Ammon in Siwa, nestled in Egypt's western desert, often advised farmers on planting seasons. Modern climatologists note that the temple's location near underground aquifers gave priests access to subtle groundwater shifts, changes that signaled coming dry spells months before visible signs appeared. When the oracle warned of famine, it wasn't magic, it was hydrogeology masked in sacred ritual. Similarly, the Pythia's infamous wooden walls advice to Athens may have stemmed from naval engineers' reports about Persian ships' vulnerabilities, repackaged as poetic prophecy to ensure military compliance. Animal behavior offered another dataset. The Etruscans, masters of haruspicy, didn't just randomly inspect sheep livers. They documented anomalies across thousands of sacrifices, creating what we'd now call a medical database. A discolored lobe might indicate liver fluke parasites which thrive in wet seasons, thus predicting floods. To the untrained eye, this looked like divination. In reality, it was early epidemiology blended with meteorology. Even the Pythia's trances might have had pragmatic roots. Ethylene gas exposure at precise concentrations could induce not just visions but hyper-awareness, a state where subconscious observation surfaced as divine insights. Psychology played its part too. Oracles excelled at cold reading centuries before the term existed. The Sibyl of Cumae, consulted by Rome's elite, likely employed sharp observational skills, noting calloused hands on soldiers seeking battle advice, or detecting the tremors in a merchant's voice when asking about trade routes. Their prophecies thrived on ambiguity, not to deceive, but to accommodate variables. Like modern statisticians calculating probability ranges, priestesses phrased predictions to cover multiple outcomes. When Croesus heard, "A great empire will fall," the oracle wasn't hedging, she was accounting for the unpredictability of war, a concept any military strategist would recognize. This perspective transforms how we view ancient divination. The line between science and spirituality blurs when you realize that Babylonian eclipse records became the foundation for astronomy, or that Mayan Akin priest star charts predicted solstices with precision we'd later attribute to Newtonian physics. These weren't opposites, they were phases in humanity's struggle to explain the unknown. The real magic of oracles wasn't supernatural insight, but their ability to encode emerging sciences in rituals that commanded belief. In a world without textbooks or peer review, the authority of gods was the only lens through which empirical observation could gain traction. Yet reducing oracles to mere analysts misses their cultural genius. They didn't just collect data, they framed it in stories that societies could act upon. A modern meteorologist might say, "There's a 70% chance of rain," but that rarely inspires armies to change tactics. When the Pythia declared, "Apollo favors those who strike after the storm," she turned weather patterns into motivational force. The brilliance of ancient prophecy lay in this alchemy, transforming raw observation into narrative and narrative into collective action. Today's climate scientists might recognize the challenge. Their own dire warnings often lack the mythic resonance that once made farmers heed oracle counsel. Perhaps the deepest lesson here is about human cognition itself. We've always sought patterns, whether through prayer or p-values. The oracles simply understood something modern science is rediscovering. Data alone doesn't change behavior. It's the stories we wrap around facts, the prophecies, the predictions, the projections that ultimately move us to act. In that sense, the priestess murmuring in her trance and the climatologist briefing policymakers share the same timeless struggle, not just to foresee the future, but to make others believe it enough to change course. Imagine the hushed anticipation as a pilgrim from Corinth climbed the sacred way to Delphi, each step bringing them closer to the gods' whispers. Months of preparation led to this moment, abstaining from certain foods, bathing in the Castalian spring to purify body and soul, perhaps even sacrificing a goat whose entrails were examined for favorable signs. Only then would they be permitted into the temple's shadowy inner sanctum, where the air hung thick with the scent of burning bay leaves and myrrh, a sensory cocktail designed to heighten the mind's receptivity. At the chamber's heart sat the Pythia, her tripod positioned precisely above the fissure where those intoxicating vapors seeped from the earth. Ancient sources describe her chewing laurel leaves, not just symbolic of Apollo, but potentially containing mild psychoactive compounds that deepened her trance. As the gases took effect, her body would shudder, her voice dropping to a guttural register that sent chills through observers. The transformation was so dramatic that some accounts claim priests tied her to the tripod to prevent violent convulsions. Yet this wasn't chaos, it was carefully orchestrated theater. Temple attendants stood ready with lyres to modulate her frenzied utterances into rhythmic cadences, while others recorded her words on wax tablets to be later sculpted into hexameter verse. The questioner never addressed the Pythia directly. A priest acted as intermediary, refining raw inquiries into forms acceptable to Apollo. A merchant asking about trade routes might have his question rephrased as, "What sacrifice pleases the gods for prosperous voyages?" This filtering ensured queries aligned with religious decorum while allowing flexible interpretations. The resulting prophecies often mirrored the structure of Greek poetry, layered with metaphors and dual meanings. When the Pythia spoke of a wall of bronze to a general, was she predicting impregnable defenses or warning of arrogance's pitfalls? The ambiguity forced seekers to engage deeply, transforming prophecy into collaborative meaning-making. Archaeology reveals how every sensory detail amplified the experience. Recovered braziers showed traces of opium-laced incense that may have induced mild euphoria in attendees. The temple's unusual acoustics, verified by modern engineers, created eerie echoes, making the Pythia's voice seem to emanate from the stones themselves. Even the chamber's layout played a role. Visitors entered through a maze like a ditan, their disorientation heightening susceptibility to suggestion. By the time they knelt before the trembling priestess, even skeptics were primed for revelation. What's often overlooked is the ritual's aftermath. Successful petitioners didn't just leave with a prophecy. They commissioned exquisitely crafted tripods or statues to commemorate their consultation, many inscribed with the very words that guided them. These offerings transformed private revelations into public spectacles, reinforcing the oracle's authority through material proof. A Spartan king's gilded shield displayed at Delphi wasn't just tribute, it was propaganda, tangible evidence that the gods favored his reign. The ritual's power extended far beyond the temple walls, rippling through politics, commerce, and collective memory long after the sacred fumes had dissipated. Reconstructing these ceremonies reveals their genius as psychological masterpieces. The slow procession up the mountain, the days of purification, the sensory overload of the inner sanctum, all conspired to induce a state of heightened suggestibility. When the Pythia finally spoke, her words carried the weight of an entire civilization's yearning for certainty. That's why these rituals endured for over a millennium. They didn't just predict the future. They made people feel, if only for a trembling moment, that they could touch it. Oedipus's tragedy hinges on a terrifying idea that no matter how hard we struggle, some futures cannot be escaped. When the Delphic oracle told King Laius his son would kill him, every parental instinct screamed to prevent it. Yet the very act of abandoning baby Oedipus set in motion the chain of events that fulfilled the prophecy. This paradox lies at the heart of ancient divination. Were oracles showing people an unchangeable script of their lives, or were they offering warnings that could, if heeded, avert disaster? The Greeks called this tension Moira, fate versus Tich, chance, a debate that still echoes in modern philosophy classrooms and neuroscience labs. Consider the alternative path. What if Laius had raised Oedipus himself, knowing the prophecy? Might parental love have disarmed the patricidal impulse? The story of King Croesus hints at this possibility. When Delphi warned him that attacking Persia would destroy a great empire, he assumed it meant his enemies. Only after his defeat did he understand the prophecy's double meaning. Here, the oracle wasn't dictating fate. It was testing Croesus's humility and interpretive skills. His failure to consider alternative readings, not the prophecy itself, sealed his downfall. This distinction matters profoundly. One view turns oracles into puppet masters, the other into mirrors forcing self-reflection. Modern determinism debates replay these ancient themes with updated vocabulary. When neuroscientists argue that free will is an illusion because brain scans predict decisions seconds before conscious awareness, they're channeling the same fatalism that haunted Oedipus. Conversely, quantum physicists suggesting randomness at the subatomic level leaves room for choice echo the ancient idea that prophecies merely outline possibilities. The through line is unmistakable. Whether framed as divine will or neural algorithms, humanity keeps wrestling with how much control we truly have. The oracle's genius lay in how they navigated this ambiguity. Look at the Delphic response to a sailor asking about his voyage. "You will go and return not dying in the waves." The phrasing allowed for two readings: safe passage or death elsewhere. This wasn't trickery, it was psychological brilliance. Like a doctor outlining treatment risks, the oracle acknowledged life's unpredictability while empowering the seeker to act. When the sailor perished in a bandit attack ashore, the prophecy wasn't wrong. It had simply highlighted one danger over another. This tension between destiny and agency plays out in contemporary life more than we realize. A weather forecaster predicting a hurricane doesn't create the storm, but their warning allows coastal residents to evacuate, changing the outcome. Similarly, when economic models forecast recessions, central banks adjust policies to avoid them. Oracles functioned similarly. Their predictions weren't fixed endpoints but catalysts for action. The Spartan king who avoided battle after an unfavorable omen wasn't surrendering to fate. He was exercising strategic choice based on new information. Perhaps the most revealing examples come from oracle consultations that went unheeded. Roman historians recorded multiple instances where leaders ignored Sibylline warnings about invading Parthia or neglecting temple repairs with catastrophic results. These weren't cases of inevitability, but of poor risk assessment. The parallel to modern climate science is striking. When experts warn of rising seas, they're not describing an unchangeable future, but offering society a chance to course correct. The ancient world understood what we're still learning, that prophecy's value lies not in passive acceptance, but in the choices it inspires. What makes these stories endure is their uncomfortable honesty about human nature. We crave certainty but resist constraints. We demand to know the future but rage against the idea it's predetermined. The oracles didn't resolve this tension. They held it up for examination, forcing societies to confront the limits of control. In doing so, they revealed a profound truth. Whether fate exists or not, the belief in it shapes behavior in ways that often make destiny a self-fulfilling prophecy. The real power of divination wasn't in seeing tomorrow, but in changing how people live today. The echoes of ancient oracles still hum beneath the surface of our modern lives, not in the trembling leaves of sacred oaks, but in the glowing screens that deliver algorithmic horoscopes and predictive analytics. That quick glance at your weather app before heading out, it's the digital descendant of Babylonian priests scanning the skies for omens, the stock trader obsessing over market forecasts. They're not so different from Roman generals scrutinizing the flight patterns of sacred chickens. We've traded tripods for touchscreens, but the impulse remains unchanged, to strip the future of its terrifying uncertainty, even if only for a moment. What's fascinating isn't just how we've modernized these rituals, but how little the psychology behind them has shifted. The Pythia's vague pronouncements find their counterpart in today's horoscopes, where a financial opportunity arises could mean anything from a surprise bonus to finding loose change in your couch. The placebo effect that once made armies invincible after a favorable omen now fuels the confidence of entrepreneurs who swear by manifestation journals or lucky socks. Even our obsession with data mirrors the ancient practice of haruspicy, where priests once pored over sheep livers for patterns. We now dissect spreadsheets and trend graphs, searching for that same glimpse of what's to come. Yet there's a crucial difference. Where ancient oracles wielded ambiguity as a tool, our modern prophecies often disguise it as precision. A weather app might boast 90% chance of rain, but we've all been caught without an umbrella on a supposedly clear day. Economic models project growth curves with decimal point accuracy, yet recessions still blindside nations. This illusion of exactitude is perhaps our era's greatest myth, the belief that more data means less uncertainty, when in reality, it often just gives us new ways to misinterpret the chaos. The Pythia would have recognized this instantly. Humans have always preferred confident errors to honest ambiguity. The real lesson from Delphi isn't about predicting the future, it's about navigating it. Those ancient priestesses understood something we're still grappling with. The most valuable prophecies aren't the ones that eliminate uncertainty, but the ones that teach us to bear it. When the Pythia told Athens to trust wooden walls, she forced the city to confront its own naval strengths. When the Sibyl warned Rome to beware the Ides of March, she wasn't just forecasting Caesar's death, she was highlighting the tensions everyone saw but dared not name. Their power came not from supernatural insight, but from holding up a mirror to the present, revealing the paths already unfolding within it. So where does this leave us with our supercomputers and satellite imagery? Perhaps with a bit more humility and a touch more wonder. The next time your phone pings with a traffic prediction or a fitness tracker nudges you to walk more, pause for a second. Behind that notification lies an unbroken thread stretching back to the first human who ever scanned the stars or studied animal bones, desperate for a sign. We may have swapped laurel leaves for machine learning, but the essential question remains, not whether we can predict every twist ahead, but whether we can face them with the same courage as those ancient seekers, breathing the sacred fumes and stepping boldly into the unknown. The future, it seems, will always be just one step beyond our grasp, and that's precisely what makes the chase so irresistible.